Well, welcome everyone to today's Faculty Academic Staff Forum at UWEC. I have the great pleasure of introducing my friend and colleague, Dr. Dorothy Chan. Dr. Chan is a professor in the Department of English and the author of 5 poetry collections, including Return of the Chinese Femme and Revenge of the Asian Woman, a finalist for the Theodore Roethke Memorial Poetry Prize and the Lambda Literary Award in Bisexual Poetry. They are an associate professor of English at the University of Wisconsin-Eau and co-founder and editor-in-chief of Honey Literary Incorporated, a 501c3 BIPOC literary arts organization. Dr. Chan was a 2022 recipient of the University of Wisconsin System's Dr. P.B. Poorman Award for Outstanding Achievement on behalf of LGBTQ+ people. They were a 2024 visitor at the Sewanee Writers Conference. Their work has appeared in the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day, the American Poetry Review, Poetry Society of America, and elsewhere. And I will tell you, elsewhere is many, many, many other places. And you can visit their website at dorothypoetry.com. So before I turn things over to Dr. Chan, I just want to remind our online viewers that you can ask questions and also give comments. So please do that using the Q&A function. And to those who are in the audience today, of course, we'll have time after Dr. Chan's presentation for discussion and questions and maybe even a reading as well. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Dorothy Chan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Benson. It's always wonderful to present at this beautiful university. I'm just really happy to see everyone. And I just wanted to say a quick thank you to my colleagues in the department, as well as Matt, who's right in the back, and the staff and faculty at ORSP for this wonderful opportunity. And so again, my name is Dr. Dorothy Chan. I'm going to be talking a bit today about the creation of a poetry book, as well as my latest collection, Return of the Chinese Femme, which is out now with Vellum. And I'm just very honored to work with the editors at Vellum. I feel that as an indie publisher, they have very strong goals of publishing works in translation and prioritizing the works of QDPOC, BIPOC, queer and trans writers as well. And it is actually, I believe, the 5-month anniversary of Return. So this is really perfect timing today. Right here, this is a photo of me as a baby. I was a very, very vibrant child. And I think that vibrancy is one of the common adjectives and threads of today, especially because I believe even in academia and of course in the larger social world, a lot of people have misconceptions about poetry being stuffy, overly academic, maybe archaic, hard to understand and hard to reach. And today I kind of want to demystify a bit about poetry and also talk about ways in which me as a contemporary writer, as an Asian American writer, as a queer writer, contemporizes forms of poetry and tries to make them more exciting and even more importantly, accessible to any reader, any audience. I think that that's very important for everyone. I am the author of 5 collections of poetry. I simply wanted to show you all these gorgeous covers, of which were not created by me, but some very, very talented artists and graphic designers. The first collection I published was back in grad school. I felt I was really lucky to get a collection out, actually several collections out in grad school, titled Chinatown Sonnets. And one of my mentors, who is a brilliant person, professor, and just somebody I really look up to, who teaches at the University of Minnesota in their top-tiered MFA program, is Douglas Kearney, and he was the person who selected this chapbook, Chinatown Sonnets. And the staff, the graduate students who are working at New Delta Review helped me create this cover. And it's really great to see all this vibrancy come to life. My first full-length collection was Attack of the 50-Foot Centerfold. And this cover actually has a couple iterations. The first batch of covers, I believe, was actually screen printed, and each cover was unique and distinct. This was selected by another mentor of mine, the great poet Richard Seitz. liken, whose book Crush, I believe, has changed many lives, especially those of queer and trans readers, writers, and artists. And he also created this cover. I also put out another book in grad school, Revenge of the Asian Woman, and this is one of my 2 books with Diode editions. I really believe in the mission of Diode editions in terms of their inclusivity and also the ways in which they are not afraid as editors and artists to make a strong political stance. And that's very important to me. And I have Patty Payne and Law Alsobrook, her husband, to thank. Law actually created this cover. And it's a really wonderful opportunity for me as the writer to be able to see a lot of the visuals, the sensory details, the images in my writing also come to life. Babe was released a couple years ago during my time here, and I was really honored that Z. Shankle Donald, who is also at the staff with Diode, created this cover. Actually, they took honey, like literal honey, and they spelled out B-A-B-E and kind of like made lollipops out of it, and then took a photo and then transferred that photo onto the cover. And as you can already tell, you know, covers, they take a lot of work. And I do think it's important for poets and writers who have books to thank the people who created their covers, because it is a lot of work, it is a lot of thought. And I think that all these are very thoughtful. And finally, my latest book, Return of the Chinese Femme, I was pretty much in tears when my editor, Dr. Sebastian H. Paramo, who I've known since I was like in my mid-20s, we kind of grew up in this world, this crazy little literary world together. He found this photograph created by an Asian American photographer named Grace Sidney Pham, who I'm still in touch with. And this cover is, or this photo, I should say, is actually like a commentary on immigrant households, on Asian immigrant households, and how many times Asian immigrant parents, like they hoard, they like to save up things because it's a survival instinct. And so basically she had found this Las Vegas, I guess it's some sort of souvenir, cup and saucer in her parents' basement, along with all these bingo balls, and put them in, and then put a red velvety backdrop, and that's how the cover was created. And so I also believe, as an artist myself, in the unity of all forms of art, and I also believe in the collaborative process. And the collaborative process was really how I was able to get all these winning covers. And covers are important because you're stuck with them. So be smart when you're creating a book. Of course, I also always, in every presentation and every talk, I have to also talk a little bit about some of the most important people in my life who helped me get to where I am today. I think that I am extremely lucky in the sense that throughout undergrad and grad school, and also just my day-to-day life today, some of the greatest poets and writers of all time are my mentors, and more importantly, my family. And this photo right here was taken during my MFA at Arizona State. This was during my thesis. Yeah, this was actually during my thesis presentation. We were all actually so excited that we locked the door and we took all these photos before I presented. So I knew I was going to pass, but it was a very beautiful moment. I am still close of all of the 3 people in this photo. This right here is Alberto Rios. I affectionately call him Tito. Alberto Rios is the poet laureate of Arizona. He also, I believe, still hosts a TV show on PBS. I think it's called Books and More. He's somebody I just really look up to. He just is very vibrant. He's very, very generous. And he taught me how to create a strong line and a strong title. Right here is the late, great Norman Dubie, who, if I have a little time today at the end, I'm going to read a poem in his honor. I unfortunately lost him quite recently, and I'm still dealing with a lot of the grief, but he was somebody that I used to talk almost every week to, and he's somebody that I grew very close to during my time at ASU. I worked as his assistant, and I transcribed a lot of the poems that were in his head onto a computer. So it was really a beautiful, miraculous thing to see such a genius person at work and get inside their head. Janine Savard, a lovely person and poet who also really pushed me in grad school. She led a very effective, important class on the persona poem, which really pushed me out of my boundaries and comfort zone and allowed me to really think more about voice, which is another major part of poetry and creation. This photo here was taken at an AWP many, many years ago. I've really lost track of time, but this is me and my undergraduate mentor, the great poet Lyrae Van Cleef Stefanen, who is the author of Black Swan and Open Interval. She is also a Cave Canem poet, and again, an extremely important poet within this landscape, especially within feminist poetry, Black poetics, queer poetics, all of the above. And of course, I also have Alice Fulton, Richard Sykin, Douglas Kearney, Michael Cook, Stephanie Vaughn, and a lot of other great mentors and teachers to thank. My latest book, Return of the Chinese Femme, is more of the focus today. And this was actually the card that my publisher, Vellum, sent to me on release day. And here's just a little description. Return of the Chinese Femme is an unabashed exploration of queerness, access, identity, and tenderness. And I'm going to be talking more about some of these buzzwords. I believe a very strong way for any person who is eager, interested, or curious, or even confounded by poetry, a way for them to enter is actually through these buzzwords. So I'm going to be breaking some of these words down by these very simple concepts. This is the title of my book, and this title is not a title that exists in a vacuum. I was a really lonely queer kid growing up, and on the weekends, I didn't really have friends growing up. So after I finished my homework, well, I studied a lot. I was always very ambitious, but I would watch Turner Classic Movies and AMC on the weekends. And if I had time, I watched maybe like at least 2 to 3 films on the weekend. And I really believe that these early experiences of me from middle school to high school helped me appreciate art in all its forms. And I think film is something that's important to all of us, regardless if we're going to the theater for a big budget Marvel film, or we're enjoying a black and white movie such as Casablanca, or we're analyzing a film in a class. Film is really the impetus for so many artists because it is literally sound, sensory, and moving pictures in front of us. This is the thing I explain to my students. Film and TV shows are hard to make, of course, but they have this luxury where the audience is able to see everything going on. You can say, oh, I see this car chase. Oh, I see this argument between the mom and the dad characters. Oh, I see these 2 characters making love. I see these 2 characters in a relationship. One of the reasons why I believe poetry is challenging is because we don't work with the visual in the same way. And so trying to write a description or a metaphor or even a scene in a poem becomes hard because we don't have that luxury of the moving picture in front of us. So how do we create that experience? How can we mimic it? And how can we make it pleasurable for our readers? So my books, or some of my books, are actually inspired by Star Wars. And I'm a big fan of the first Star Wars. I'm not necessarily a fan of the whole franchise, but I will say that the first Star Wars film is just magnificent. Something that I did take away from being a child and a preteen who loved film is a lot of successful films have titles that are about 4 words or more, that really set the scene, that really allow you to understand what is going to happen in the film, and that can entrance you in, and maybe you buy a ticket. And so some of my favorite films include Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was actually out the year that I was born, late 80s. I remember watching Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon when I was a kid. Let's see, a B movie I really love is Plan 9 from Outer Space. All of these titles are longer titles, and they set the stage for us. And so I wanted to do the same thing. So that's why my book titles include Attack of the 50-Foot Centerfold. I was really hooked on that word, attack. B movies, but also inspired by part of a Star Wars title. Revenge of the Asian Woman, like just a lot of action in your face, and then the noun, the image of, let's say, the Asian Femme. And then, of course, the most recent, 5 months old, Return of the Chinese Femme. And I want my books to also make sense sequentially, like each of them can stand alone. But as an artist, I want to have a long life, a long repertoire, and I want everything to make sense cohesively. This talk about titles and keywords, buzzwords, words that lead us into writing poetry, which is actually such a simplistic concept because in order to write a poem or anything, we need words. And we need to choose those words with purpose, care, and pride. There's this really great essay published in Poetry Magazine from January 2020. And this essay is titled Drag Poetica. And it's written by this amazing queer artist who is a poet and a drag performer named Wo Chan. Drag Poetica is the title. And this right here on the board is a little excerpt from this essay. This is an essay I teach. This is also an essay I recommend anyone to show their students because I think it's quite inspirational. Here's a quote, and then I'll start to break it down a little. The main subject of this slide and one of the major concepts of today is the term flood subject or flood subjects. Wo Chan narrates, "It is January 10th, 2020, and I am a drag performer and poet living in Brooklyn. In class, Charles Wright, a great poet, once said that a poet has about 3 to 4 flood subjects." And again, that term, flood subjects, is key. And flood subjects basically means that they're subjects that the writer returns to for all of their life. And I think it's great for us to name our flood subjects. Sometimes they change, but I actually believe that the term doesn't necessarily change, but we evolve how we might look at a certain concept or idea. And so for Charles Wright, who was Wo Chan's mentor, Charles Wright said that his flood subjects include God, landscape, and his backyard. And I really like this range because we know that since literally the dawn of time, there have been so many written works about God and religion. Spirituality is important for many people. But then I like how we kind of go panoramic into landscape, which can mean many things, such as maybe traveling to Colorado and seeing the mountains, or admiring something, yes, within your own backyard. So this range of God, landscape, and backyard, or his backyard, I should say, it's an interesting range, and it's a great zooming in and zooming out. Wo Chan, the author of Drag Poetica, states that their flood subjects include my mother, the abject shit, anecdotes, and hello, my name is Wo Chan. And so it's kind of great to see these two different approaches. Of course, the mother figure, the paternal or maternal figure, the parent, the guardian has always been an important subject emotionally for so many people. And I think that, for lack of a better word, that's quite relatable, whether it's a positive or negative experience. Within the essay itself, this part, the abject shit, actually comes from Wo Chan recalling one of their first memories of shitting themselves in an outdoors market. And so it's a really cute story of going back to their childhood. Anecdotes, I think, is great because everything that's great actually literally starts with a story. Thinking about something anecdotally, maybe your best friend or your partner tells you something funny that happened to them. And I really adore the final one, hello, my name is Wo Chan, because this is something that is also ever evolving, but it's still the same person no matter what. And so with these two poets, these examples, we can see that everybody has flood subjects. And right here, I've listed my 4 flood subjects, which by no coincidence are 4 of the greatest things on earth, right? So I win food, sex, fantasy, and fetish. And so these are 4 topics that govern most of my writing. And it's important for me because I always believe that as a writer and an artist and a teacher, I not only bring, let's say, my background and like my qualifications to a room and my art to a room, but I also bring myself as a person, who I am, what I look like, where I come from, meaning I explore these 4 topics of food, fantasy, sex, and fetish within relationship to popular culture, Asian American femme identity, Hong Kong, which is where my parents and family are from, and yes, queerness. And so these markers of like immigrant identity, queer identity, femme identity, questioning one's, I guess, womanhood, if that word fits, being Asian American, being Asian, none of that can be divorced from any of these fun, complex topics either. It all exists, it all coexists within one. One of the elements of Return of the Chinese Femme, and also simply my writing in general, is, once again, I was talking about film. Film is a visual enhanced experience. But I also have a lot of visual inspirations. I feel like I was very lucky because I went to Cornell for my undergrad, and at 19, I got this travel grant to visit Tokyo, Japan. And that was the first trip I took alone. And because I grew up in a Chinese immigrant household, food, sharing food, hot pot, all these different experiences have always been a big part of my upbringing. And so this slide right here is simply for some visual inspirations. Like, what inspires somebody? The sensory details of food, yes, but also like what's the pleasure, even the sensuality of eating food. And this photo in the background was taken at one of the this was in Tokyo, and this is at Sensoji Temple, which is not only a popular tourist destination, but also an important place that locals go to pay their respects, a temple of which there's many different stalls. And I love going to the ice cream stall, of course, and I like to bring these visual inspirations to life in my work, along with the visual inspirations of this. So right here, these 6 images to my right are books, and these are cookbooks. These are Cantonese style cookbooks from the late 80s and 90s that my mom owned in Hong Kong, and she gifted them to me. And this is another way for me to make poetry accessible. So I talked a bit about, like film and getting into film, getting into poetry through film. We can also get into poetry through food, and making food can be an art. And this is quite vibrant as well. Lots of colors, artistic presentations. And a recipe consists of words and instructions, all of which can actually be applied to writing a poem, which leads me to this next part. Right here on the board, you'll see 5 labels, or excuse me, 5 titles. And these are the titles of the 5 sections of Return of the Chinese Femme. And of course, any book contains a table of contents, but I decided to formulate mine as a full-on experience. I'm also talking a bit about unity of a full book, a cover, writing the collection, writing effective works, beautiful works, memorable works. I called it this evening's menu. And the first section of my book is number 1, recipe for an Asian femme. I'm a snack, I'm a tease, I'm the dish. And so we're playing with voice right here. And it's very long, it's descriptive. Section 2 features my signature form, the triple sonnet, and I like to call the triple sonnet as some sort of like amuse-bouche, the palate wetter, amusing the mouth is literally what it translates to from French. Number 3, the recipes for disaster, sex, and popular culture. Section 3 consists of recipe poems. Section 4, an ode to decadence, yes, consists of odes, which is another very beloved and old form. And section 5, one more dessert for discovery, the way that we close a book. And so this was the layout, and this is the layout of my book. And this was also the layout of the whole process of ordering the entire manuscript. So often in writing books, people are thinking, oh, how do you write a poem well? How do you write a story well? That's, of course, essential. But what's also essential is how we're presenting everything that we've written. And presentation can lead to a win or a lose. And I've seen it. And so it's important to have this skill of how am I going to curate my work well? And I'll zoom in a little bit to my signature form, the triple sonnet. And so a little bit of background first, and later I'm going to read, hopefully, at least one of my triple sonnets. The triple sonnet is my signature form. And the first word that you probably want to focus on is the word sonnet, S-O-N-N-E-T. It is a form of poetry. And it is arguably the most beloved form of poetry. And what's beautiful is right now we're living in 2024. It's going to be 2025 soon. But if you take a minute to actually think about it, the sonnet was born in 1235 in a sunny Italian court. And that was so many centuries ago. The sonnet transcends time and place and geography. It transcends language barriers because it has been written and it has been translated into all different languages. Literally, the word sonnet in Italian will take you to a translation of little song or little sound, which is fitting because poetry is a visual experience, but it's an auditory experience. Poetry comes from the tradition of, yes, spoken word, and it began as an oral tradition. The sonnet is also about romance and love, but romance and love can always be redefined in our century to include modes of queerness, to include modes of poems that aren't just about, let's say, the white, cis, heteronormative male gaze upon a woman. We can also include romance and love within discussions of non-monogamy, polyamory, within friendships that can also be romantic, within love that is truly equal and pleasurable for all parties. The sonnet is 14 lines, and I always tell my students, remember, it's like Valentine's Day, it's a love poem, so it's 14 lines. It's bite-sized, so on a page, it takes up less than half a page and looks quite gorgeous on a page. And it is an iambic pentameter tradition, which I'm just going to simplify for today. It's a very fancy academic term for simply saying that each line is 10 syllables long with an upbeat and a downbeat. I'll tell you what I love about the sonnet. The 10-syllabic pattern per line actually mimics our everyday speaking patterns. So next time you have a conversation, think about and count how many syllables you're saying before you take a breath. So the sonnet itself represents a lot of breath, breathing, and what's really natural. And probably the most important part of the sonnet is it contains a volta, or a turn of thought or argument in the poem. And yes, poems contain arguments because you're literally, as the writer, trying to convey a message or an argument to an audience. And an emotion can also consist of that argument as well. My triple sonnet, because I have an art history background as well, was inspired by lucky numbers and also the triptych structure in art history. One of the most famous triptychs within art history, the most common one, is probably by Hieronymus Bosch, and one of the panels titled The Garden of Earthly Delights, panels that has 3 parts of art within them to make one whole piece. And with my triple sonnet in grad school, during my PhD, when I created the form, I was really thinking about the ways in which contemporary living, breathing writers canonize themselves. And I think that forms, traditional poetic forms, are great to play with. But what's also important is that we are able to create our own, and that enhances our voice. One of the best examples, a lot of you have probably heard of one of the foremost poets in today's landscape, Terence Hayes. He has the American sonnet, and he actually took that from one of his predecessors, Wanda Coleman, who named it the American sonnet. So sonnets have a big play within today's literary landscape as well. I think to further demonstrate everything that I've been talking about, and also for the sake of time, I'm going to read one poem today, and then I'll get to questions. I have these pink handouts if you would like to follow along. And yeah, I think I can also pull this up here. Here is one of my triple sonnets. That's also in this book. Triple sonnet because boy, you're starstruck and I'm a wonder. Boy, you're starstruck. I love the way you rub the red lipstick off above my Cupid's bow, how you call it the halo of my face, because girliness equals goodness equals godliness equals, let's be real, oh my God, it's like that moment when Hades and Persephone meet in the fractured Greek myth, and the goddess of spring chugs her can of pomegranate soda because her future lover is oh so fine, and check out that ass. They don't make stories like this anymore, do they? Boy, you're my good afternoon delight as the fountains at the Bellagio go off, as the tourists at the bistro across the street munch on steak béarnaise and croque monsieur and wild escargot de bourgeon, as the water dances to Sinatra's Come Fly With Me. And I've just named about every cliche in the romance book minus the flowers. I had to stuff the Vegas Strip in there too, but no, let me start over now. F was right that day in Tallahassee when he traced the lines on my palm and said the 3 long ones at the end meant I'd have many great loves in my life, and how I laughed at F's face after. And oh boy, was F right, I think, when X asked me on the phone if I've ever been in love, and I say no, too fast. And I might be lying to her, but who really cares? I used to want to outsex everyone, make everyone want, make everyone pant, make everyone chew their steak just a little harder, order the extra shot of whiskey, and his lips go wild because I've just drank bourbon, the extra tingle of tongue, the red lipstick that gets him all messy, gets me all messy again, gives me the halo above my Cupid's bow. And what's it like being in lust with a man and a femme at the same time? It's like dancing in a corner, your tank top about to slip off, exposing nipples, but you keep dancing. And boy, I'm a wonder. And when you kiss me, I think about her red lips kissing me. Thank you. And I'm happy to take questions or read another poem. I believe we have maybe 8 minutes left in case anyone had any questions. Yeah, hi, good to see you.
Yeah, me too. So I have never read the book, so I'm just kind of curious about the logistics. Like,
Mhm.
do you pick the title of the book first to focus on the cover, or it's like you mentioned the sections, or do you start writing the poems and
Yeah.
together, and like how long does it take? Like,
And every writer's process, every poet's process is different. For me, with the poems in this book, I wrote each poem over a span of time. And that's a general answer, but a more specific answer is as follows. During grad school, I perfected my triple sonnet form, a form that I still write in today. And for a while, I was really obsessed, because the sonnet is an obsessive form, with writing many triple sonnets. So I would write one a day. But then after a while, I got a little tired, a bit exhausted with just working with just one form. So I did a little research, and that took me to writing some recipe poems, some odes, some poems in free verse. So I believe that in order for a book to happen, every poet needs to start by really disciplining themselves and getting on a tough, I would say even rigorous, writing schedule. We're very busy in academia. And so during the week, it might be harder for me to write, but during the summer and winter breaks, I discipline myself by writing a poem a day. And a poem a day, basically, I'll write one poem and get it about 70 to 80% there. And then the next day I'll edit it and start another poem. And many times it becomes cyclical. So I was just saying, oh, for a while I wanted to just write triple sonnets. But sometimes I might want to write poems that are, let's say, inspired by a place like Las Vegas or Hong Kong. Sometimes I might want to write poems about past relationships, whatever it is. But then I would say that after you have about 45 plus pages. That's not a book quite yet, because a book isn't just about numbers, but the minimum amount of pages for a full-length book of poetry is 45. When you, as the writer, hit a 45 mark, it's a good idea to start taking inventory of what you have. But what you have may not make the final book. Or maybe a poem is for another book, a section is for another book. And then once you start to feel comfortable and you feel, okay, there's a narrative thread going on, it makes sense, it's cohesive. I tend to reread my poems and I think about what is missing though. It's starting to come together. And then after that, I start to think about structures. A lot of my friends who are also poets, they'll want to do like a 3-part structure, a 3-arc. For this one, I decided to do a 5-arc. And the title of the entire collection and the title of each section may come to you when you're rereading your poems, may come to you when you're drafting your poems. Many times authors tend to gravitate towards the titles of their strongest poems, or circle or highlight the words that appear the most in the book to think, okay, what's a buzzword?
Can you talk at all about if or how your voice has changed in your writing over time? And I feel like it's how it may have changed or not changed.
Yeah.
Grad school for now.
Thank you so much, Alex. So the question was how my voice has changed or not changed over time. And as we know, voice is really the central touchstone hallmark of like writing itself, effective writing. I would say that over time, I believe my voice has become more confident and traveled more confidently on the page. A very early experience for me that really did shape my voice, kind of going back to when I was 19 or 20, I was an undergrad at Cornell, and Cornell has such a vigorous, important writing program, creative writing program. And I got to work with Lyra Van Cleef-Stefanen, who at the time was incredibly busy. So I was just honored she made time for me. And it was important for me to put in time for her. And I think that's key. It's a reciprocal relationship. All good relationships are. But an important part of that mentorship I got from her was as follows. I remember one time I met with her in her office, and she did this thing, and every professor has their style of how to critique, but we were in a one-on-one session, and she started reading one of my poems aloud. And she would say, that line's good. Or she'd say, I don't believe you, which meant that the line wasn't good enough. But then she would say, you're a strong writer and you're very disciplined, but your problem is that you're too introverted, you're way too in your head. So your speaker is not projecting outward enough to an audience. Your speaker is talking to themselves in their head. And that was when I knew I had so much work to do with voice, because voice, persona, the speaker, is not going to be effective unless that person or being who's narrating is actually projecting outward and talking, hopefully, to a wide enough audience. And that was a very early on ass-kicking lesson. And it was a really key one because it was a way for me to say, like, and think about, okay, I'm too self-conscious, I'm in my head. How can I write a line starting with just a line so I don't scare myself? How can I write a line that is actually addressing an audience? A key remedy to that could be using the word, even just starting with using the word you, Y-O-U in a poem, and then thinking, who's the you I'm talking to? If a you is being named, that's somebody in mind. Another remedy could be name the characters in the poem, or if you don't want to give them names, like give them initials, refer to them as A or T or whatever it is.
I was thinking about the word excess that you had used as part of the process for writing. I was just kind of curious how you get that across to our students. Who probably have quite a bit of this Midwestern reticence in their character, and to allow them, encourage them, to take those kind of leaps that you're describing.
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you so much. So the question is about the word excess, and how the word excess is one of my flood subjects of writing, and how I, as a writer, and more importantly, in this case, as a professor, can apply the word excess, teach my students who might be a bit more culturally reticent in this part of the country to maybe be a bit louder or excessive, let's say, to really hold space for themselves and their characters, their speakers on the page. I have a lot of fun teaching the intermediate and advanced poetry workshops here. Those are my favorite classes to teach. And especially when I get to the 410 advanced poetry workshop, I usually have much closer relationships with these students because I've been working with them for at least a semester or two. Last week in my 300 level class, or 2 weeks ago, I assigned my students an in-class activity. And this in-class activity did deal with excess. And it dealt with this term called cataloging, which is basically the word catalog, if you remember getting like the Sears catalog or the Macy's catalog in the mail. Cataloging in poetry means that a line or two or several in a poem, you're cataloging, you're listing items that have some sort of relationship to each other. Perhaps in the poem, you are going to a dim sum buffet and you're sampling all the different types of dim sum and you're naming the dishes. Maybe the poem deals with visiting an antique shop with a friend and you're naming, oh, we saw a rocking horse, we saw a big map, we saw a mask, whatever it is, listing items. And I think that this activity was important for students because it's a way for them to think about specifics. Oftentimes, excess in any form of writing happens the more specific and direct we get with naming things. Not just saying the word flower, but actually saying a cabbage rose or tuberose or naming the thing. Not just saying the word, I went to the zoo to visit the animals, but naming, oh, I saw the capybaras and the white tiger, naming these things. That's not quite excess yet, but it is a mode in because it allows people to have confidence in words they select and in their experiences and having directness, taking us back to film, directly seeing what's happening in front of us. Many times our students are very lovely, but they have this reticence about them. And the ones who feel that they're talkative are actually not that talkative for my standards. And the creative writing world is very competitive. And so it's important for us, to like put our best foot forward and have really high standards for ourselves. The ways in which I also teach my students to be a bit more excessive on the page is if somebody, let's say, has a strong poem, especially our queer and trans students, if they're writing a poem about that identity, or our BIPOC students writing a poem about their identity, I'm like, hey, this is so clear. Keep doing this. In this poem, you are talking about what queer love means to you. And I love that you directly stated the word non-monogamy. I love that you directly stated the word the term queer friendship. How can we bask ourselves more within that? Because this has a lot to offer. It can even start by going into, oh, this is a topic that we haven't really read about yet. And I like how you really took a space in an effective way by telling us about who you are, because yes, we might know each other, we might see each other in the classroom, but within the world of poetry, we're actually getting into our psyche. And I do believe that some of our students, especially our marginalized students, I also believe young women in the classroom, sometimes they really need that boost of confidence of saying, one of my favorite examples is many times a young woman in the class may write a poem about a horrible sexist experience they survived, right? And I'll say to them, this poem is angry, but I'm using the word anger in a productive way. I don't see that as a negative. Then I say, how do you define your version of feminine or femme rage or a woman's rage? And how has rage, let's say, if you've taken a Rex class or read feminist theory, how does rage actually solidify and empower a feminist? How is it important that a young woman, why is it important that she's naming that anger directly? And I really love getting into excess through anger because that is actually what is political about the personal. The young woman maybe naming a personal experience, But that's actually a political idea as well, because as we already know, sexism, misogyny, and all these like systemic harms and bigotry exist. And how can we actually start to attack it? And I think it's beautiful because the minute that a student decides to be direct, get out of their shell and name who they are, who their character or speaker is, I like to be, okay, tell me, how is what's going on in this poem relevant to any frustrations you might have about living life right now? And I think that's real. And excess, of course, can be very sexy. Excess, of course, can be very artistic. It can be linked to art and music and cinema. But excess can also be linked to high emotion and rage. And I try to explain to my students that the range of emotions is beautiful, and we don't stick to one. An effective poem actually has many. And that's excessive as well. Thank you.